Thank you, and welcome to everybody who's attending this final One World colloquium of the 2021-22 season. I'll introduce our speaker in just a moment, but I want to start out with a few items of bookkeeping. First of all, I'm Stephen Lewandowski. I'm the chair of the Communications Committee of the Psychonomic Society, and it is our committee that's running this One World series. I also want to introduce Maike Kroneisen, who will be moderating the discussion at the end of the talk. And to facilitate the moderation, let me encourage you to put all your questions throughout into the Q&A facility. Please don't use the chat for that. We have the Q&A facility to handle your questions. And the advantage of that is that we can upvote. We can all vote on your questions. And that makes Micah's job really easy at the end. So now, without further ado, let me introduce our speaker today, Helen Fischer, who got her PhD in cognitive psychology from Heidelberg University in 2016. She was then a postdoctoral researcher at the Stockholm Resilience Center in Sweden before moving to the Max Planck Institute for Human Development here in Berlin, where I am right now, where she spent 2 years as a researcher. And then in April this year, so that's just a few weeks ago, isn't it? She moved to the University of Mainz and the Leibniz Institute for Knowledge Media in Tübingen, where she is splitting her time being a professor at the University of Mainz. And without further ado, I'll now hand it over to Helen. Helen, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the nice introduction. And let me just share my screen. Okay. So, yeah, thanks for the introduction and for giving me the opportunity to share my research. The talk that I will give to you today is entitled A Metacognitive Perspective on Politicized Science. So, I was looking for some misinformation examples to present to you that exist out there on the domain of politicized science, that is science where public beliefs are divided along partisan or worldview lines or along the lines of party affiliation. And what I stumbled across is this. What appears to be a Fox News headline saying, while the world is waiting for a vaccine, one mom has found a solution to fight back against the coronavirus outbreak. I thought, yeah, this is most likely misinformation. This is most likely fake news. I don't believe that this one mom has truly found a solution against the coronavirus before even vaccines were developed. But let's make sure maybe she has. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt and do a little background check. So I did a little background check. It turns out this is not a Fox News headline. Rather, it's just an ad that was spread in news group to lure people into buying some kind of oil that supposedly works against the coronavirus. And this I find it wasn't even proper fake news. It was fake news. And this I find is symptomatic for the information environment that citizens are navigating with respect to politicized science, such as climate change or vaccinations, or for a more recent example, COVID-19. With respect to politicized science, we have the whole range of true and false information and everything in between. So we have information that is scientifically accurate, that is the best available evidence that we currently have at our disposal, such as the IPCC graphs that you can see in the bottom right corner of the screen. Then we also have information that does have a true core, but that was spun or decontextualized to render it misleading. And then we have information that is simply false, that has been simply fabricated, like the one on the left, that scientists prove that man-made global warming is a hoax. And the question that intrigues me really is, how do citizens form beliefs in this confusing information environment? Now, what we know, what is very well established, is that citizens use two different types of information to form beliefs about politicized science. That is their knowledge, and that is their political attitude and their ideology. So we know that with respect to climate change, for example, climate change beliefs or concern or risk perceptions relate to what citizens know about climate change. So their understanding about the causes of climate change or its consequences or its state. We also know that political attitude and ideology, be it political ideology or ideology about the economic system, how the economic system should be structured, also relate to climate change beliefs. In fact, they are among the best, if not the best, predictors of climate change belief, as has been shown in a very famous meta-analysis by Hornsey, published in Nature Climate Change. So these two things might appear quite distinct, and they are in a way distinct, as knowledge deals with how people think the external world really is, whereas political attitude and ideology deals with how people think the external world, the political system or the economic system should be. But then I sense they're also very much related, because both of them deal with models of the external world. They deal with how people believe that the external world is or should be. What I'm interested in is something pretty different, and that is metacognition, and that is an insight into own models of the world. So an awareness of, for example, how good one's knowledge is about climate change. So an insight into one's own models about the external world. Now, what is metacognition? So metacognition can be defined as our ability to evaluate our own cognitions and cognitive processes. And this, so how could this be relevant for forming beliefs about politicized science? So imagine you have this person here, and he or she is Googling on the internet information about climate change, such as climate change is mainly caused by a variation in sunbeam. So this is not something I made up. This is a frequent claim, a frequent contrarian claim that climate change is not in fact anthropogenic, not caused by humans, but has natural causes. Okay, so how could this person assess the veracity of this claim? So there's one very obvious solution that we've already talked about, and this person could use their object level knowledge about the external world, in this case, about climate change. So for example, this person might know that greenhouse gas increase is driven by humans. But then there's another type of information this person could use, and this is metacognition, in this case, meta-knowledge, knowing what you know. So meta-knowledge can be defined as an insight into the validity of own knowledge, but also an awareness of the limits of own knowledge. So meta-knowledge is being able to say, this is something I firmly know, here's the demarcation line, this is something I don't really know anymore, and this is mere guesswork. And if you think about it, being able to say something like this could be very important to liberate your object level knowledge. Now, it's important to realize, though, that both object-level knowledge and meta-knowledge can vary in accuracy. So object-level knowledge varies in accuracy as a function of its correspondence with the external world, in this case, the state or the causes of the climate. Meta-knowledge varies as a function of the correspondence of the confidence that we have in our knowledge with the accuracy of that knowledge. So meta-knowledge is accurate when we have high confidence in knowledge that is accurate and low confidence in knowledge that is inaccurate. Meta-knowledge is inaccurate when we have high confidence in knowledge that is completely bogus and low confidence in knowledge that is, as a matter of fact, perfectly accurate. Now, the research that I present to you basically makes 4 claims that will hopefully convince you that metacognition is in fact relevant for understanding public beliefs about politicized science. But these 4 claims actually only summarize something that Mark Twain has already known over 100 years ago, namely, what gets us into trouble is not what we don't know. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so. And the 4 findings that I'll present to you are the following. First, citizens are metacognitively confused about politicized science and more so than about non-politicized science. I will show this with the example of climate change. Second, metacognition predicts beliefs about politicized science. I will also show this with the example of climate change. Third, metacognition relates to belief updating following mixed information. I will also show this with the example of climate change. And finally, metacognition predicts behavior in relation to politicized science. This I will show with the example of COVID-19. So first of all, I was interested in finding out how accurate is citizens' insight into their climate change knowledge. So how good are people at indicating what they know and what they don't know about climate change? Now, how did we test this? So we gave German citizens, and these were nationally balanced quota samples of German citizens, a range of statements, true and false statements about climate change. And these statements covered the domains of state, causes, and consequences of climate change. And they were true and false, and we asked citizens to indicate whether these statements are in fact true or false. So just to give you two examples, that could be something like the global change in temperature in the past 100 years is the largest during the past 1,000 years. This is true. Or climate change is mainly caused by a natural variation in sunbeam and volcanic eruption. This is false. And then we also asked them to indicate the confidence that they have in each and every one of these verifications of statements by asking them, how certain are you that your answer is correct? That citizens indicated on a scale from 50% to 100%. And 50% was not at all certain, I was guessing, and 100% was labeled as certain, I know the answer. And critically, we compared these assessments of statements about climate change with statements about general science. These were also true and false, and these were taken from the National Science Board Science and Engineering indicators. So these indicators measure public knowledge about general science, and that is non-politicized science. So biology and physics, just to give you examples, that would be something like electrons are smaller than atoms, or lasers work by focusing sound waves. So not much political contestation, not much misinformation regarding the size of electrons or the workings of lasers. Now, how did we measure metacognitive sensitivity or metacognitive accuracy? So in this research and all the research that I'm going to present to you, we used a signal detection theoretic approach to measure metacognitive sensitivity, which was developed by Maniscalco and Lau, and which has the beauty that it can be directly related to object level sensitivity. So how does that work? So we can think of object level sensitivity as measuring how well can citizens distinguish between true and false statements about climate change, or in other words, how accurate is citizens' knowledge about climate change. Expressed in signal detection theory words, this would be D prime. Very similarly, we can think of metacognitive sensitivity, namely as how well does confidence differentiate between accurate versus inaccurate responses, in this case, the climate change statements, and of course also the general science statements, which is, as I said, termed meta D prime. And since both meta D prime and D prime are measured on the same scale, a signal to noise ratio scale, these two can be directly related. They can be directly compared. So we can say for one and the same person in terms of knowledge, they are here. The knowledge accuracy for climate change is here. In terms of metacognitive accuracy, they're only just there. And yeah, since meta D prime and D prime use the same scale, we can take the difference or we can take their ratio. And this is what we did. We took their ratio, and this is called metacognitive efficiency, which is metacognitive sensitivity controlling for object level sensitivity. So it's basically metacognitive accuracy at one level of object level accuracy. So you can think of it as the accuracy of the confidence judgments at one particular level of the accuracy for knowledge. Now, the main result of this research is the graph on the right. And what did we find? We found that, as you can see, for general science, so the statements about the lasers and the electrons without much contestation, without much misinformation, with respect to general science, German citizens performed very well at indicating what they know and what they didn't know. In fact, they were around perfect indicating. So they were around perfect at indicating their confidence. Of course, this doesn't mean that people know everything about biology and physics. They don't, but also they don't have to. In order for them to have perfect metacognitive efficiency, they need to be able to say what they don't know. So they need to be able to indicate, yeah, I'm not so good with lasers, I'm not so good with electrons, and then that's fine. With respect to climate change, however, the pattern of results looks pretty different. With respect to climate change, citizens performed alarmingly poor at indicating what they know and what they didn't know. In fact, they were only half as good as their knowledge would indicate. And by the way, interestingly, we gave the same statements about climate change also to people working in climate science. So these were people working at different research institutions dealing with climate change all over Germany. And these verified the same statements, the exact same statements as were verified by citizens, and they performed just as well as the general public performed with respect to general science. So this effect is not driven by the statements that we gave to citizens. These are statements that can, in theory, be verified with high metacognitive efficiency. It just wasn't the case for the public. Now, why does that matter? Why should we worry, or why should we care if the public lacks metacognitive accuracy in relation to climate change? Well, I think we should care for two reasons. First of all, we should care because it suggests that the information environment that citizens are navigating with respect to climate change is less reliable compared to the information environment that they are navigating with respect to general science. But we should also care because metacognition is relevant for beliefs. So this is the second result that I'll show to you. Metacognition predicts beliefs about politicized science. How do we know? We took the same people. So this is not a new sample, it's the exact same sample. And we asked citizens about the beliefs that they have about climate change. We asked them about the belief that climate change is risky, and we asked them about the belief that climate change is anthropogenic. And we had also assessed their political attitude on a spectrum from left to right. And first of all, we replicated this finding that I already mentioned at the beginning. It's a highly reliable and replicable finding. Political attitudes relates to climate change attitude, climate change beliefs. So we found that those who self-identify as further on the right of the political spectrum, these were less likely to say that climate change is risky, and they were also less likely to say that climate change is anthropogenic. Now, for the interesting part, we found that for both beliefs, both for the belief that climate change is risky on the left, as well as for the belief that climate change is anthropogenic on the right, we found that when controlling for worldviews, so when controlling for knowledge, D prime, when controlling for political orientation, for gender, age, and education, the confidence that citizens had in their knowledge still predicted their climate change beliefs. It predicted the belief that climate change is risky and the belief that climate change is anthropogenic. And we also found an interaction that is quite interesting because it indicates that the confidence that citizens have in their climate change knowledge was actually more predictive of climate change beliefs than the confidence that they have in their general science knowledge. So this suggests that there's something domain specific to it. It's not just that confidence in general, for whatever reason, predicts climate change beliefs. It's not even the case that confidence in science knowledge predicts climate change beliefs. It's more that very specific confidence that people have in their climate science, climate change knowledge that predicts their beliefs. Controlling for knowledge, right? Controlling for knowledge. Which brings us to the third result that I present to you, namely that metacognition relates to belief updating following mixed information. Now, suppose this person here again, and he or she is looking on the internet for information about the consensus on anthropogenic climate change. So he or she wants to know how high is that consensus. Do scientists agree on anthropogenic climate change or don't they agree? Now this person might come across both accurate information, that is that there's very high scientific consensus on anthropogenic climate change. In fact, there's a lot of research on that showing that around 97% or so of studies agree and scientists agree that climate change is anthropogenic, so that there is a consensus. But he or she might also come across inaccurate information, such as this book, Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming, which they don't. Now, of course, it's highly relevant to understand how citizens update their beliefs when they come across such mixed information, some true, some false. And we thought that metacognition might play a role there, and metacognition might help us understand how citizens update their beliefs in response to this mixed information. Namely, specifically, we thought that with low rather than high confidence in accurate knowledge, citizens may be more easily persuaded by misinformation, and that with unjustified high confidence in incorrect knowledge, citizens may be more likely to stick to flawed beliefs. So we asked, does low metacognitive sensitivity relate to more climate skeptical belief updating? Again, controlling for object level knowledge. Now, maybe I should mention that the term climate skeptic is maybe misleading or maybe understood by some, because we normally think that skepticism is something good, and don't we want people to be skeptical, right? But yeah, the term climate skepticism really just refers to science denial, basically. So climate skepticism really just means holding beliefs about climate change that are not aligned with scientific consensus. Now, how did we test this? So we assessed people's knowledge and their confidence, which allowed us to measure metacognitive sensitivity again. We assessed their political attitude and their free market beliefs. So free market beliefs were measured with items such as an economic system based on free markets, unrestrained by government interference, automatically works best to meet human needs. And we measured their prior climate change beliefs. And the prior climate change beliefs were measured with items such as climate change is risky, climate change is happening, but mostly due to natural variation, or climate scientists don't agree on whether climate change mainly is anthropogenic. And then we gave citizens mixed information on climate change. And the information was mixed in the sense that most of it was accurate, aligned with scientific consensus on the risks and on the fact that there is a consensus. But a minority of it was false. So it was not aligned with scientific consensus on climate change. For example, saying that the net effects of climate change will be positive, so that we shouldn't act on climate change, we shouldn't mitigate climate change, or saying that there's no consensus on anthropogenic climate change, and that climate change could just as well be caused by natural variation. And then we assessed citizens' posterior climate change beliefs. What did we find? So first of all, again, we found that the prior beliefs are related to political attitudes, so where people place themselves on the left-right spectrum, and even more so, they are related to free market beliefs. But then when it comes to metacognitive sensitivity, or when it comes to belief updating, we found that when controlling for these worldviews, so when controlling for free market beliefs, controlling for knowledge, controlling for political attitude, age, gender, education, and income, metacognitive sensitivity still predicts belief updating. And it predicts belief updating in such a way that those with higher metacognitive sensitivity, that is a better insight in what they know and do not know about climate change, were less prone to climate skeptical belief updating, right? So they were less prone to having more climate skeptic beliefs in response to being confronted with this mixed information. So we concluded that citizens with more accurate awareness of the varying accuracy of their knowledge are less prone to climate skeptical belief updating following mixed evidence. And the last domain that I'll present to you today is that metacognition predicts behavior in relation to politicized science, namely COVID-19 in this case. So this is something that probably you all know. It's the Director General of the WHO saying, we're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic. Fake news spreads faster and more easily than this virus and is just as dangerous. Now, what is the infodemic? So the WHO defines the infodemic as an overabundance of information, some accurate and some not, that makes it hard for people to find trustworthy information sources and reliable guidance when they need it. Now we know from prior research that humans use varying levels of confidence as a signal to guide behavior, and confidence can act as an internal advice giver when external guidance, for example, in the form of feedback, is unavailable. So we thought, if metacognition can serve this very important benefit to guide behavior, then maybe metacognition and confidence in this case also can serve the purpose of an internal guidance, namely by helping citizens decide how much weight, confidence, they should assign to a particular belief. And if this is the case, then confidence can inform subsequent behavior during the pandemic or the infodemic. And specifically, it should be the case that someone who has high metacognitive sensitivity, high metacognitive accuracy, should be more likely to show beliefs that are aligned with recommended to show behavior that is aligned with recommended public health guidelines, and should be more likely to show vaccination willingness. Why is that? Well, simply because if someone has high confidence, a high metacognitive accuracy, then low confidence beliefs that are likely to be inaccurate, such as gargling salt water or avoiding vaccinations, are downweighted and are less likely to inform subsequent behavior. In contrast, high confidence beliefs that are likely to be accurate, such as wearing face masks or getting vaccinated, are upweighted and more likely to inform behavior. Now, how did we test this? So we presented citizens with true and false statements, very much like the ones from prior research that I already showed you. False ones are in blue. And they are something like the coronavirus is part of a global effort to enforce mandatory vaccination, or the new 5G network may be making us more susceptible to the coronavirus. And the true statements were things like people with diabetes are at a higher risk of complications from coronavirus infection, or people may be infectious 2 days prior to showing symptoms. So we showed these statements again to a nationally balanced sample of German citizens. And we found that, first of all, citizens are they're reasonably well informed about COVID. So citizens were way more likely to indicate that a false statement is false rather than true, and they were way more likely to indicate that a true statement is true rather than false. And this accuracy of their beliefs about COVID related to compliance, as you can see in the scatter plot on the right. So this is interesting and relevant because it shows that it's important for citizens to be well informed, but it's also not new. Other researchers have shown this before. Accuracy of beliefs, the object level beliefs, relates to compliance with respect to recommended behavior guidelines during COVID. Now, what we also found is that metacognitive insight into this varying accuracy of beliefs predicts compliance, even when controlling for the accuracy of the object level beliefs, that is D prime, and also when controlling for political attitude, gender, age, or education. Metacognitive accuracy still predicts compliance, meaning that the insight into the varying accuracy of beliefs predicts compliance, controlling for the overall accuracy of beliefs. So it doesn't matter whether we analyze it with frequentist regression or on the left or with Bayesian regression on the right, we always find metacognitive accuracy predicts compliance. In a second study, we wanted to know whether metacognitive accuracy also predicts vaccination willingness. It was again assessed in a sample of German citizens using the same approach. So we presented citizens with true and false statements. The false statements such as the new corona vaccines can change the genetic code of unborn children and even cause infertility, or Markus Söder, German politician, threatens prison sentences for repeated criticism of the corona measures, or the Bundeswehr, the German military, sent tanks and other military vehicles to the corona demonstration in Berlin. And the true statements being something like, so far, there is no evidence that mRNA vaccines against coronavirus manipulate human genes. The virus is mainly transmitted via small respiratory drops, or it is only after the second corona vaccination that the full protection is achieved for the vaccines approved in Germany. So that was true at that time. Now it's 3 vaccinations. Again, we found that the accuracy of the beliefs relates to vaccination willingness. But the more exciting part, again, we also found that an insight into the varying accuracy of these beliefs predicts vaccination willingness at one particular level of the accuracy of these beliefs. That is controlling for the accuracy of these beliefs, D prime, controlling for political attitude, gender, age, and education. Now, we can come back to one claim that I made at the very beginning of this talk, and that is citizens are more metacognitively confused with respect to politicized science compared to non-politicized science. Because now also with COVID, we have more research on that. So if you think of a scale of M ratios, metacognitive efficiency, we find that for general science, metacognitive efficiency tends to be perfect or close to perfect. So both in the research that I presented to you and a more recent research, this finding appears, it was replicated, metacognitive efficiency for general science is around perfect. With respect to COVID, metacognitive efficiency is lower than that. We know this from the research that I presented to you and also from more recent research by Lisi. And with respect to climate change, it's even worse than that. We know this from the research that I presented to you and more recent research from Thaler and Brudermann that replicated this using an Austrian sample. So the general pattern that we now have is that when it comes to metacognitive efficiency, it's worse for politicized science compared to non-politicized science, but within the area of politicized science, it's even worse for climate change compared to COVID. Okay, so to summarize, citizens are metacognitively confused about politicized science and more so than about non-politicized science. This indicates a specific impairment in assessing one's accuracy in validating statements about politicized relative to general science. Metacognitive accuracy, however, has downstream consequences above and beyond object level accuracy. Accuracy awareness of one's understanding of climate change predicts beliefs and belief updating in response to information and misinformation, and accurate awareness of the varying accuracy of own beliefs about COVID predicts compliance and vaccination willingness. So from the research that I presented to you, what could a metacognitive perspective on politicized science look like? We could think of it from what we have so far in terms of antecedents of metacognitive accuracy and consequences of metacognitive accuracy. So I was very deliberate in choosing the word antecedents and not causes of metacognitive accuracy, because so far we only have correlational evidence. But this correlational evidence does suggest that metacognitive accuracy is lower for politicized versus non-politicized science. And then, as we have seen during the talk, metacognitive accuracy relates to belief, to resistance to misinformation, and to behavior. And next steps will be to relate it to the dissemination of information and to information search and selection. So the implications of this research, I think, are mostly in the area of sort of practical implications of science communication. Namely, science communication should not only aim at increasing object level accuracy. It definitely should. I love when science communication does so, but science communication should also aim at fostering metacognitive accuracy. So there's prior research showing that it can be helpful to help citizens detect reasoning errors or inaccuracies in fallacious claims. The research that I presented to you suggests that it may also be helpful, or this may be a promising avenue to help citizens detect errors in accuracy in their own reasoning and beliefs. Okay, so to conclude, science-related misinformation is a global concern. Metacognitive insight is a key skill that enables citizens to use information wisely, to hold well-informed beliefs, and to act in line with evidence-based guidelines. Increasing metacognitive accuracy may therefore provide a novel and promising means to address the societal impact of misinformation about politicized science. Yeah, should you be interested in data or material or R code for the studies that I presented to you, links are all in the publications, and thank you very much.
So thank you, Helen, for presenting your very interesting research. There's a lot to think about. They're already clapping hands in the chat, and there are also already questions in the Q&A. If you don't know it, you can also like questions in there to let me know which questions are the most interesting. In case you aren't familiar with Zoom, the Q&A is at the Zoom taskbar, and typically that will be at the bottom of your screen. You might have to swipe with your mouse over the screen to make it appear. If you change some of the Zoom settings, the Q&A might be somewhere else. In that case, I can't help you very much. You have to look on your screen and try to find it. So yeah, never change the basic settings of Zoom. We also have the options to unmute your microphone. So if you want, you can talk to Helen directly, but we do ask you that you post some brief version of your question in the Q&A. And then when I will call on you, you can signal me via the raise your hand feature. This is also in the Zoom taskbar, that you would like to ask your question directly. And I also apologize in advance because I'm sure I will mispronounce some of your names. So I'm not very good with names. Okay, so now we can finally start the discussion. So I start with reading one of the most popular question in the Q&A. I just open it. So it's from Stephen. Is it first my question, do you want to speak to Helen directly? You can just use the raise your hand button. Yeah, okay, so I have to look at how to unmute you. You want to ask directly? I can't see the unmute button. Maybe the technical help can. I'm not sure why. Okay, maybe it's not activated. I'm sorry for that. I will just read it. Okay. Is it possible to determine if metacognition or knowledge is a better predictor of COVID? Of COVID mitigation behavior?
Yeah, I'm sure. And if I remember correctly, I think the predictivity, well, it always depends on how you measure things, right? But so I think that if you include all of them in one regression model, then we had different results for the compliance versus the COVID vaccination intention. And for the vaccination intention, we found that object level knowledge and metacognitive accuracy were both, in the sense, equally important. Whereas for the compliance, I think we found that the metacognitive sensitivity is more important.
So I hope this is enough for Stephen. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the rights to unmute someone, so I just have to read everything. Okay. Stephen, if it's okay, I can just switch to the next question, or do you have an additional question? Okay. Then I will just start reading the next question from Richard. Have you considered measuring the effects of level of passion for the topic or confidence and meta-knowledge?
That's interesting. No, we haven't so far. So passion for the topic, you mean whether you find the topic relevant or so? If this is what you meant, then I could imagine that passion for the topic does actually correlate with confidence. So I think that confidence always reflects a variety of cues that go into that that kind of accumulate in the confidence judgment. And I don't know whether passion for the topic, as you said, would be one of them, but I could imagine it being one of them, because if you have passion for the topic, then you probably read a lot about the topic, you feel that you're informed about the topic, you're always, when new information comes up on the topic, you click on the link and you immediately want to know what came out of it. And so this might increase your confidence level, for better or worse. So yeah, I think it could have direct effects or mediated effects by shaping confidence judgments. No.
Okay, Richard, is everything answered, or do you have an additional question? You can just type in the Q&A. Otherwise, I will just mark it as answered. And I will switch to the next question from Leo. You showed the metacognitive efficiency was generally low for German non-scientists, with some individual differences. So what causes individual differences in metacognitive efficiency? How do you increase it?
Yeah, so that is the million-dollar question, right? How to increase metacognitive efficiency? So, well, there's research on that, obviously, trying to improve metacognitive efficiency that produced mixed effects. Some don't find very strong, especially not domain general effects for increasing metacognitive efficiency with trainings. But then there's also promising results. For example, I just recently read a study by Fleming and colleagues where they gave feedback on either just object level performance or object level performance and confidence on I think it was a perceptual task. And this really had domain general effects on metacognitive efficiency for another task. So this is quite promising, and they use this metacognitive efficiency measure that I just presented to you. So it may be possible to increase metacognitive efficiency that may then even generalize across domains. And this is, I haven't done research on it, but this is definitely on my list. So I think there's other ways of how we could increase metacognitive efficiency. So for example, what other research have tried to do, they didn't use this metacognitive efficiency framework, but for example, in research in multiple text comprehension, what people try to do to increase metacognitive insight is raise awareness for the influence of prior beliefs. So the prior beliefs that then influence how people approach a text, how they approach novel information, and that might make them prone towards motivated reasoning, for example. So this is one idea, to raise awareness for the influence of prior beliefs by educating people about this, or also educating about the effects of other object level biases that people may have, such as jumping to conclusions. So that you think you're well informed, you come to an informed judgment, even though you may actually need to sample some more evidence on that before being able to make an informed judgment. And obviously people differ to the extent that they jump to conclusions and they think they sampled enough information. But this may also be something that the metacognitive awareness for being more or less prone to jumping to conclusions without sufficient or reliable evidence could be trained potentially. Yeah.
I have a question related to that. I mean, do you think it's also related to working memory, for example? I mean, in the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of information, and sometimes you have the feeling you couldn't handle everything, because every day there are new numbers, and I mean, I have absolutely no idea about metacognition, but I thought it could be also an important factor.
Yeah, working memory may be a laboratory setting, right, where people are really like bombarded in a short time frame that they need to keep in mind over this relatively short time frame. I'm not sure about in how far this relates to like web surfing or so in the real world. I don't really know. But then it just reminded, what you said, you just reminded me of this concept that Klaus Fiedler calls metacognitive myopia. So people's ability or inability to realize the reliability of or the validity of the evidence that they are sampling. So he says that people kind of lack this ability to realize that they may be sampling non-reliable and invalid evidence and still come up with a judgment and still come up with a conclusion that they feel is perfectly backed up by evidence when it's really not. And this may relate to working memory capacity, I could imagine, yeah. But I don't know.
Thank you. So I will read the next question. Also from Leo, what is the reference for flaming? Did you hear me? So should I repeat the question or?
So I don't hear anything.
Okay, sorry. The question was from Leo, and the question is, what is the reference for flaming?
That is a good question. I don't know out of the top of my head right now the reference for flaming, but yeah, no, sorry. I don't know what journal it appeared in. Yeah. I think neuroscience of consciousness, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Leo just typed in another few words. I'm not quite sure if I understand it. Fleming was a Swiss study in which people apparently trained metacognitive efficiency, but it's a question mark behind it, so I'm not sure if he's asking us or if he's asking
that one that I just talked about. This is this is what Michael just posted is the one for metacognitive efficiency, but the one I just talked about the training effects, this is in general, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry for the misunderstanding. I wasn't sure.
No worries.
Okay, then we have again a question from Richard. In terms of passion, someone might rate their passion for global warming 5 on a scale of 10, but a 10 out of 10 on vaccines. Would higher passion lead to more reading science for the later? I'm not so sure. I know the truth may be the case, given that people tend to search for belief-confirming information.
So I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but as far as I understand it, the question is whether passion for science could also lead to more reading about the science, but also potentially motivated reasoning, right? So this is how I interpret the question. So yeah, I think this could very well be the case. So if you mean with passion some kind of involvement, right, then this could be the case, and it does remind me of this very famous effect that actually science literacy or other forms of knowledge or skills such as numeracy or also knowledge have this weird effect or this weird relationship with polarization, in the sense that you probably know this famous finding by Kahan, where he showed that when you order people on their science literacy, so that the understanding that they have for science, which probably relates to what you talked about just now with the passion for science, then and then you order people according to their political ideology, then you find that for those who have more liberal political ideology and who self-identify as voting for Democrats, that the relationship between science literacy and climate change beliefs is really as you would expect it. Those who are more knowledgeable, who have higher levels of science literacy, are more likely to hold beliefs that are aligned with the science. Whereas for those who have more conservative worldviews or self-identify as voting Republican, voting for the Republican Party, the relationship is really not what you would expect it. It's either not there or even the other way around, so that those with higher levels of science literacy are less likely to hold climate change beliefs that are backed up by the science. So those with the highest level of science literacy actually are the ones who are most heavily polarized, the ones with the biggest gaps in beliefs. And so if this only remotely similar to passion for science, I don't know, but then this would be, yeah, this would have this dramatic effect as well. But it could very well be that if you just really have passion for science, then this effect might not in fact emerge.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. I hope this was the answer you expected. If you still have questions, you can type them in the Q&A. Right now, there are no open questions. So feel free to ask everything you want to know. I still have a question, but it could be a very stupid question. But at the beginning of your talk, you make the statement that people are more confused about politicized science somehow. And I asked myself, when does it start to be somehow, yeah, political? I'm not sure if anyone can answer that, but
yeah.
Yeah, but where's the starting point when everyone starts talking about it and you think it's very important somehow? Is the importance the point, or?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. The importance, the political importance, that there's something to gain and something to lose with the science. Mm-hmm. So if there is policy related to the science, then there's something to gain and something to lose, and then it can become politicized. This is the case for climate change. There's a lot to gain and a lot to lose with respect to policies and to regulation, for example, transformation, energy systems, a lot. Same with COVID. This has high political relevance, immediate relevance for policy and for regulations. And so people obviously don't agree in a democratic society on what types of regulations they would support and what extent of regulations would they support, more laissez-faire or very strict lockdown, for example. And so as soon as it has practical relevance for actual policy, then the science can become politicized.
Mm-hmm. And right at the beginning, you were asked how we can increase metacognitive sensitivity. Do you also think that it's different for normal science and for politicized science? Or, I mean, we don't know how to increase it, but I also have the feeling that our ability to increase our metacognitive awareness is different for normal science and somehow, political important stuff.
Yeah, so that is a very good point. That is a really interesting question. So first of all, we found that with respect to general science, there's not much to increase on average, at least. Of course, there's some people who are below perfect metacognitive efficiency, but other than that, probably if we ask maybe more difficult questions, we will find lower metacognitive efficiency also for general science. And then I think that your question really points to something very interesting. This could be that then more these metacognitive trainings that I talked about that may have domain general effects, like even if trained only with perceptual tasks, could be relevant. Whereas for politicized science, the other types of information that I mentioned, those raising awareness for prior beliefs or for the object level biases, such as jumping to conclusions, could be relevant. So to make a long story short, I think that when it comes to politicized science, I think metacognitive interventions that raise awareness for potential triggers of motivated reasoning become relevant. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Your science or your research is actually important. Mine is always very, not so exciting.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, are there still any questions? There's something in the chat. I just have to scroll down. Okay, no more questions. Okay, so thank you so much, Helen, for this very interesting talk on such an important topic and for the great discussion.
My pleasure.
I think we all learned something today. And it's a good day if you learn something new, so it was a good day for me. Thank you all for the interesting discussion, and with that we are closing today's session. This was the last seminar for the summer, but the new One World seminar speakers and the dates will be announced later in the summer. So stay tuned. Of course, in case you miss science talks, we have the recordings of all the talks on our website, and this recording hopefully will be there soon.